This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the second season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is on youth mental health in Singapore, and we have Dr. Jacqueline Tilley, Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychology at the NIE, and we also have Asher Low, founder of Limitless, an NGO that provides counselling for youth. Welcome to the podcast today. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so first thing first, Asher, could you tell us more about yourself and why you founded your organization on counselling for youth in the first place?
Well, I'm a social worker, right? And I've been working with youth for, many years. I can't even remember how many years I've been working with youth. It's more than 15.
Okay.
Right? So I literally started working with youth since I finished my O levels, and I started working with at-risk youths, doing group work, facilitation for an organization, and after I got my degree with my social work degree, I think this was something that I enjoyed doing as well. So when I went into my family service center, I started the youth team there. But what I realized there was that youths don't really want to go to the family service center because I'm their father's social worker or their mother's social worker. I'm not theirs, right? And at the same time also I was serving in church as well, and working very, very closely with the youths in church, and that was a safe space. And what I noticed was that the youths in that environment, in that community, were doing a lot better than the youths that I work with outside, right? And one of the things that I was thinking about was that, are there really youth spaces out there, right, that can provide that safe space for youths? And how many of them are there, right? Because there's like 200,000 youths, right? Or even more than that. And like how many drop-in centers, how many spaces are there really out there? So when I left the family service center, I started Limitless.
Okay.
And one thing that we realized was that the moment we opened our services in 2018, so we started Limitless in 2016, right? So we kind of figured out a lot of things here and there, like what works, what doesn't work, what are the needs here, what are the needs there, right? And when we figured out that, hey, we're going to just start services, right, provide counseling services for youth, what we noticed was that in the first month, every single young person that came in for mental health issue.
Okay.
And we realized that there was an issue there. That means, right, that there's a very big gap in the services, If every single one of the youths coming into us, right, are coming in for mental health issues, then I think this is a very unmet need in Singapore. So we pivoted and we figured that we're just gonna work with youths who struggle with their mental health. Yeah, and we've been doing that ever since.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me go to the COVID-19, because right now there's a pandemic and all that. So we know that there's a growing national concern about mental health issues among Singapore youth. So and more government-led measures focused on youth mental health were also announced following the River Valley High School incident in July 2021.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask, I think I'll go to Jacqueline first. How has COVID-19 affected mental health for the young?
Hi, thanks for the question. That's actually a really good. That's a really good point. I mean, people talk a lot about how COVID-19 has affected mental health across the board for all age groups, but particularly youth. I think what the research is telling us is essentially that to a large extent there's because they let's say they stop going to school, for example, which in Singapore is actually very good. So I'm talking a lot about what's happened in the US research because that's primarily what we have more data on. But for example, in the US research, what we're seeing is that because of the lockdowns of schools, kids are not going to school, and that actually leads to issues like for one, they don't have the social interactions with friends, which is problematic. Then you also have issues of being stuck at home with parents. And for example, for adolescents, where they may or may not have a good relationship with their parents, they are essentially stuck at home with no avenues to potentially, get, respite from them. And so I think those are the two primary age-specific challenges of COVID-19 as a result of that. I mean, on top of that, you probably have some academic stresses as well, because, with a lot more, home-based learning for kids who potentially don't have the support at home, that could create more stress for them. Or on the other hand, just not having the additional support, from teachers, etc. That in itself is problematic, especially when, it's not like exams are going away, right? So, I mean, I think those are a couple of things that I can think of that are more specific to the Singapore context that we know about. But Asher, you work on the ground, so you probably know a little bit more.
Yeah, Asher, can you tell us more?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's really a time of great adjustment. It's a lot of adjustment going on, and when adjustment happens, adjustment issues happen. All right. So when we talk about not being able to hang out with friends, not being able to do things that they used to cope, right? Then after that, also being having to deal with the movement in and out of school, working from home or studying from home, then going back to school, then I lose my CCA, I lose contact with my friends. That's a huge issue, right, for young people, especially when we understand that this is an age whereby they are building their identity. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their identity revolves around, being around people at the same age, right? So when these adjustments happen, I think it did have a huge toll on their mental health. And then on top of all that, right, what we also see, like what Jacqueline was mentioning, is that the youth who struggle the greatest are the ones who have poor family relationships, or their parents are either outrightly abusive or inadvertently abusive. So what I mean by inadvertently abusive would be like emotional abuse, right, verbal abuse. These are things that happen quite often in the Asian context, that we're talking about a generation that doesn't really do well with that. Yeah. And when that happens, that becomes a huge struggle. And for the older youths, I think we go back to, insecurity of what's going to happen next. Like, what is the next step for them? Am I going to graduate into unemployment? Am I going to find myself not being able to go into the school that I want to go, right? Some of them grew up with plans of going overseas and studying overseas. Then, now I cannot, right? So once again, there are a lot of things that are happening, right? That I essentially would use the word insecurity.
Okay. Also uncertainties also, right?
Yeah, uncertainties as well.
Okay. But actually, even before COVID, we saw surveys and studies that said that, the mental health among the general population in Singapore, youth were actually the most vulnerable group, actually. So, I mean, what contributed to this? What are some of the key factors that contributed to the rise in youth mental health issues in Singapore? How about Jacqueline first?
I will start off with something that's relatively controversial to some extent. I think it's problematic in some ways because, first of all, we're talking about the Singapore-specific context. We don't actually have any prevalence data on kids, anything under 18 years old. So we don't actually know for sure if there has been an increase year on year in terms of mental health issues. Okay, so first of all, I think we need to take that objectively. However, we do see that abroad, right? For other countries where there is prevalence studies over time, you do see that there has been an increase. So now the second question, again, academically, becomes, okay, so what could be creating that increase, right? And one of them, which I always go to, is it possible that it's the rise in our understanding of mental health issues, right? So more people are seeking help, more people are able to actually recognize that they need help. So if you're actually looking at the number of people, for example, who are seeking treatment as a way to say that mental health issues have risen, then people may be seeking more help because they recognize they need help, right? So that's another possible reason. Now, assuming all of those methodological issues aren't there, then you have this issue of, okay, is it an increase in risk factors? So people talk about things like social media, more uncertainty in this new world because, it's just a different paradigm shift right now because of the internet age, etc., right? So, and globalism, etc., globalization, etc. So that could be in and of itself increase of risk factors. I like to actually talk about it or think about it in terms of a reduction in what we call resilience factors, right? What has protected people in the past that no longer protects them from risk factors? And, you can see anything from, what we sometimes call family, sort of a breakdown of the family, right? Or it's more like, I would see it more or less of the break, and not so much just the breakdown of the family, the fact that society hasn't caught up with how families have changed. All right, so I think that's one of them. So in the past, you might have extended families, and currently you have a little less of that, right? You could talk about it in many different ways, the way that social interactions happen now, or the nature of social interactions, the fact that kids nowadays, you don't see them out in the playgrounds. Like when I was growing up, I swear, I think I spent most afternoons at the playground with people of various ages, right? All the way from 3-year-olds to like 15-year-olds will all be in the playground hanging out. I don't see that. I've got 8-year-old and I've got a 4-year-old, and I don't see that happening anymore. The playgrounds we used to go to are completely empty. There are no kids. So there is that lack of community as well, and the question is why, right? What's going on? The other thing is, are parents working longer hours? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know empirically if that's true, but that people talk about that in terms of COVID-19, where the work-life balance is a lot less because parents are constantly working from home and they're always at home, but they're also never really with their kids, right? So I think there are lots of different ways to look at why, but I think it's very much, for me at least, an empirical question which a lot of people haven't been able to answer sufficiently. Asher.
Yeah, so Jacqueline talked about social media, talk about family and community. So Asher, which do you think is which came up more often in your line of work?
I think it's a lot. We can't. I think, to be honest, you can't just boil it down to like one thing. It's a whole systemic, holistic issue that's causing this rise in mental health issues. But one thing we do know is that millennials and Gen Zs, right, have been observed to struggle more with mental health issues than the previous generations. To me, I think it coincides a lot with the rise of hyperconnectivity. Right. A lot of Gen Zs and even the younger millennials don't know a world that they've never been connected to the internet. Yeah. Whereas like Jacqueline and myself, at least we have some part of our lives, right?
Also we think.
I remember dial-up, and I think one of the things, like we spend more time outside, right? Because we didn't have things to do at home.
Yeah, that is true.
So, but if I had the internet back then, right, I wouldn't be outside, and I think a lot of things play into this. That right now we have the most educated generation. They know so much, but then again, right, knowledge can be a plus and knowledge can be a minus. It can be, it can be a pro or it can be a con. But, an excess of knowledge would also mean an excess of worry, right? And what we're seeing is that the youth are worried about a lot of things. They're worried about what's happening overseas. They're involved in the BLM movement, right? Even though they're in Singapore, and there's nothing that connects them to that. Right, they're involved in they're worried about they're worried about political issues that are outside of Singapore, and that's affecting they're worried about what's happening in Singapore. They're worried about the environment. They're worried about global warming. They're worried about the economy, and we are seeing this happen right at a very young age. At the same time, we're talking about youth, right, who are at the age whereby they are just learning how. They're learning what their bodies look like, right? And they are more connected to influencers online, right? They are kind of like telling them that they need to look a certain way, or and you need to have this number of followers, and all that. So that in and of itself is a stressful thing, Yeah, and then we talk about like on top of that, there's an increase in like, in academic stress. I'm seeing more and more youths, right, not having the time for themselves and spending more time doing their homework, staying back in school, right? I don't remember having to stay back in school until like 4, 5 o'clock every day,
Definitely not.
But now the youths do that. And I'm like, why? Right? But they have classes until like 2 or 3 o'clock, and I'm like, why? Right? So I think that the truth is we talk about life right now, right, being more and more difficult. Yeah, and when we think about previous generations, not that we didn't have issues with mental health. I'm pretty sure we did. I had, all right. And when we think about it from that perspective, yeah, previous generations, older, like even the older millennials, we struggle with our own mental health as well. But we weren't under the same amount of pressure that the youth today find themselves, being put under. At the same time, once again, unpopular opinion from a mental health professional.
Okay.
Right. I think a lot of times I also noticed that mental health issues are starting to be romanticized.
Fair enough.
Romanticized in what way?
It becomes cool, or like it's a mood, right? so when we think about it from that perspective, like everything becomes a mental health issue. I mean, I could go online and read up on it and think like, hey, I have depression. I mean, if I could think about it from a therapist perspective, from a cognitive behavioral like perspective, right? We think about how our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are very much interconnected. If I keep going online reading up about depression, I start thinking like, hey, maybe I'm depressed, right? When actually, in actuality, you've never done a Ph.D. You've never been assessed properly, right? No, and I think that, hey, I meet like this one or two kind of symptoms. Maybe I'm depressed, and it's like it could be something to be depressed right now, right? And when that happens, I start to act and behave in a certain way, which might perpetuate the thoughts, which might perpetuate the actions, which might perpetuate the feelings, right? And it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, lah. Right, so,
Okay, but Jacqueline, because you are a clinical psychologist, so can you tell us more about this, like self-fulfilling prophecy for depression?
I think what Ash is essentially saying is that, I mean, a lot of how we feel about things, right, essentially is based on how we perceive the world around us, right? And so we have a more positive view of life or the world. We're more likely to feel a certain way, right? So let's say you can take an objective situation. I don't know. Asha, throw me an objective situation.
I either do well or don't do well in school.
Okay, so let's say you get 80% in school, right? 80%, or you take 80 over 100 for a test, right? If you decide to look at it as, oh, I got 80%, that's not bad. I know 80% of my work, right? How are you going to feel about that versus if you think I didn't get 100? Right? So the way that you think or perceive a situation, an objective situation, impacts the way that you feel about something, right? So you'll be feeling happy on one side and sad on the other. I think what Ash is talking about is that there are some youth who might think, oh, it's kind of cool to be depressed. And I'm starting to look at life with a more depressive framework, right? I think of, I take a more negative or less optimistic view of the world. And that can perpetuate, certain feelings in you and therefore your behaviors, right? So you feel sad, you're more likely to act sad as well. So from that point of view, I think that's what Asha is talking about as, there's this, that there may be some romanticization of what mental health is at what we might call the subclinical levels, right? So that means you're not quite, majorly depressed. You don't quite meet criteria for major depression, but you feel kind of sad sometimes. And I think that is also another issue with mental health literacy, right? With an increase of information, I mean, this is everywhere, right? With an increase of information without actual understanding of what a disorder actually is. I mean, anybody has at any one point of time felt sad. Right? Has felt, kind of like negative about the world. You might have had, and had not been able to sleep for a little bit. But does that quite reach the level of what we call major depression, therefore mental illness? That's a big question mark, right? But then the other question then is that, well, if you're feeling distressed, should we not just address the fact that you're distressed, right?
I'm just putting on my social media lens, we do see a lot of young people who said that they actually really had depression, and they cried out for help. They didn't know where to go for help, or their parents ignored them, or they went to they just didn't know where to go for help, and they were dismissed as just being sad. So I think that's the other flip side, right? You don't want to just don't diagnose these kids because you just say that, oh, you're just sad, you will just cheer up. I think that's quite harmful also, right?
Yeah, I think that's something that we do notice as well, and that boils back down to how psychologically minded our parents, how psychologically minded our teachers. When we think about youth who struggle with a mental health issue, I think really one of the biggest challenges that we're noticing, right, are the experiences that they have when seeking help, and that brings us back to seeking help in and of itself. Because when we look at the current research in Singapore done by the different organizations, right? Campus I did something a year ago, and we did something like 2 years ago, and NYC did something a couple of years ago, right? So we're looking at it like across the board. We're looking at 1/3 to 2/3 of young people who have been polled, right, saying that they're not going to seek help if they struggle with mental illness or they struggle with a mental health issue, because they are concerned about a few things, right? And response stigma, getting a bad response from the people that they want to talk to, from people that they talk to about, right? Is one of the very big reasons why they are not going to seek help, right? And it boils back down to how psychologically minded, are the people in these kids' lives, right? So help seeking is an issue, and I think at Limitless, right, what we have done is over the past 2 years, we've been focused on making help seeking easy for youth, barrier free for youth, right? And I think that kind of plays a part in the work that we do right now, why we're getting so many youths reaching out to us right now. Yeah.
Jacqueline, what about you? What do you think about this? Because we do notice that a lot of youth, they hesitate to seek help from their parents, especially, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think Asher in some ways touched on the main help seeking barriers, right, to a large extent. I mean, from my point of view, and I tend to see kids who are a little bit younger than what Asher probably tends to see. I think Asher probably sees, I guess 16 and above. Asher, maybe a little bit younger or older. How?
We see technically from 12 to 25, but the majority of them are 16 and above. Yeah,
that was my guess, because I tend to see adolescents, but I also see a sort of younger set of adolescents under 18s to a large extent. I also see emerging adults, but that's a different matter. But I think to some extent for me, parents' consent is a huge issue, right? So whether parents have the literacy, kids can't go to treatment by themselves. They need parents' consent. So if they aren't willing to tell their parents about their mental health illness, and let's say they even do, what's the parents' response going to be? Oh, you're a snowflake, you toughen up. If you didn't do X, Y, Z, then you wouldn't feel this way, etc., right? So, I mean, to a large extent, the way that I see, at least for my younger set of kids, where parents' consent is key, is that, we need to reach out to the parents to make them more psychologically minded in some ways, because that's the hugest barrier for kids to get help. And this is not just in Singapore, okay? So let's not say, oh, Singapore is in a bad... I don't think so. I think this is across the board. You're seeing a lack of youth getting the help that they need across the board. And even when they do get help, they don't necessarily stay in help. So I think those are the two other... That's the other issue, right? So yes, let's say they see, they go at IMH for one session or something like that. Do they go back, and why not, right? So I think it's a larger, Ash would like to say, I think systemic issue where there are many various players that are creating these different barriers. It goes back to whether they're psychologically minded. But I actually think nowadays youth are a lot more psychologically minded. It is because the barriers become the adults in their lives who can give them the access that make it difficult, or the parents the people in their lives who might make it a little bit more challenging because their response is so important to these kids. So, for example, they don't want their parents to know that they're struggling because they don't want to make their parents feel bad. Right, so they won't tell the parents, even if the parents potentially might help, get them help that they need. So, I mean, there are lots of different psychological things at play, I think.
Yeah, and we're looking at it, you're right, it's a very systemic issue, and we're looking at what are the services available, are the services requiring parental consent, and what we understand, right, is that it's not just about consent, but parents become gatekeepers to their children's, their children's treatment, not just with consent, but with money as well, right? With access to transport as well, and when we are talking about like even for those who do get the help that they need, right? Being an Asian society, right, with many parents kind of seeing this as like bringing shame to the family, then even if they begrudgingly consent, the kid might not want to get the help anymore because of like what's the aftermath of going to treatment. Yeah, what's gonna happen after that? Yeah, and one thing that we do notice as well is that it's not just about psychoeducation once, but it's consistent psychoeducation to parents. Talking to parents and letting them know, because what we also do notice is that once or twice, the parents will kind of like say like, oh yeah, I realize, and there's no such thing. Okay, not that there's no such thing, but I have to stop myself there. But it's very rare, right, that a parent doesn't want to help their child, doesn't want the best for their child, right? But when we look at it from the perspective of a parent that has been trained, has learned from their own experience that, maybe in their mind this doesn't exist, the kid just needs to toughen up and all that, right?
The strawberry generation, right?
Yeah, and then we go in and explain what mental health issues are. We explain, what's anhedonia. We explain why the kid can't get out of bed. We explain why the kid doesn't want to talk to them, right? We talk about like, what are some coping mechanisms, what are some tips they can use, right? And then the parent kind of adopts it for like 3 weeks or 2 weeks.
2-3 weeks, and then it
let's
goes
not just
away.
say parent, the child as well too, lah. Okay, let's be honest. If you actually work with patients, I mean, it's across the board. It's hard to change behaviors. Okay, I mean, it's all habitual, right? So it's hard to change habits and behaviors. So, but yes, I agree with Asha completely.
I do notice though that it's easier in the client or the child, right, for them to actually see the behavioral change when they're a little bit older.
Okay.
And so we do notice as well, like what you're saying, right, is absolutely correct, because it's a process. Sometimes I have parents coming to us and say, can we just give my child an injection and then get them better? I'm like, no.
What?
We can't.
It's not a fever, man.
Yeah, I know, right? And then I have to sit down and explain, right, like what SSRIs do, what the different kind of like medications do, and it's not going to fix your child. Mm-hmm. It will help them cope. And it will be very much the therapy that helps the child get better, right? And it takes time. And so I often tell the parent, it's like, physiotherapy, you learn how to walk again. It takes time. You cannot just like, hey, walk again, right? You cannot, right? So it takes time. It becomes difficult. But the reality is because, right, it's a difficult process. And the parents, for those who really love their kids, it's a heartbreaking process as well. Yeah. Okay. And for those who are irritated by their kids, it's a very long irritating process. Right. So it becomes a difficult process for everyone to go through, and I think we cannot discount caregiver stress either. Yeah.
So beside parents, what other like support system can we give to youth? And what about schools? What's the school's roles in all this helping youth cope with mental health issues?
Education Minister Chancellor Singh talk about how the schools are putting in a lot more resources into training more people to ensure that these kids are getting help, and we are seeing that. I mean, from where I'm sitting at NIE, we're training. We are training school counselors. We are training just clinicians in general, master's levels, counselors as well. We have certificates for school counseling for in-service teachers. So there is definitely a push towards getting more resources out there within the school system. So, I mean, it's a process, right? It takes time. I mean, this is, again, like I said, it's not an issue that's specific to Singapore. You're seeing it in the US as well, right? You're talking about what they call the college mental health crisis. They're suddenly seeing a huge, increase in number of kids who are going to university with very serious mental health issues, right? And a lot of college counseling centers cannot cope with it, and they don't understand why. And some people say, well, you send it. Some of the college level counselors will say, well, you're sending us broken kids in the first place, so they're not getting help earlier on. And when they're finally in college, where they're able to independently seek help, that's when all the issues come out and they're getting the help that they need. So it's not that there's a sudden rise or increase in the number of mental health cases, but the fact that more people are seeking help at that stage. So anyway, but going back, so it's not an issue that's specific to Singapore. I think Singapore is trying to take the steps that it can towards creating more resources for the youth, but it takes time. And I mean, that's a challenge, right, across the board. I mean, they've done so many different things. They even have REACH, which is sort of like the step in between schools and IMH, right? So they're doing a tiered system, so you don't necessarily have to go to IMH if you need to see somebody. You have all these different youth NGOs like Limitless, which are coming out to provide the support that youth specific. So I think there is definitely a push, a recognition for the needs of youth to be met. But I think Asher will have a better sense again on the ground to what extent these needs are actually being met with what we have and where the gaps are.
Yeah, Asher.
I think we're moving in a very good direction. We're moving in a very nice direction right now, because when Limitless started, we were one of 4 agencies.
Just 4? Wow.
In Singapore.
It's crazy.
Yeah, one of 4. And the other 3 were not specifically youth and mental health. Right, they were youth agencies that happen to do mental health work, or they were mental health agencies that happen to do youth work. Right, so Limitless was the only one that was only predominantly doing youth mental health work, aside from CHAT, but CHAT doesn't provide therapy. Yeah. So now I think things are changing. Right, gone are the days whereby we talk about in the past whereby there was a conversion program, right, in schools whereby teachers become counselors and they go through a very short conversion course. And what we see are that the teachers that tend to become counselors were ex-DM, so they will approach the child with a DM kind of perspective, right? So now we're looking at actually real trained master's level counselors, right? Or at least those who have a bachelor's degree, and then they get trained even more, which is a good thing. But I guess change doesn't come quick, and change doesn't come easy. Yeah. But I would say that we are moving in the right direction. It's gonna take a while. Mm-hmm. It's gonna take a while, right? It's gonna take a while before every school has a solid peer support program. Yeah, not every school is going to be like Fairfield Methodist, right? They have a super solid peer support program.
Oh, I did not know that. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, they have. They were one of the first schools, even before peer support became a thing. They started the peer support program in school already. Not every school is going to have 3 counselors or more, right? Yeah, not every school is going to be like RGS, for example. It's like a bunch of counselors. Yeah, so right now we are looking at schools that are adopting right better programs. We are seeing teachers getting trained. I mean, one of the challenges that we do notice along the way is that it's not just about training teachers, but it's also about changing teachers' mindsets. Yeah. But of course, I mean, with the new generation of teachers who are millennials, right? Who are psychologically minded, I think that is not gonna be an issue for too long. Yeah. And you know, what I am noticing is that things are moving for the better. Things are moving for the better, but we can't expect everything to get better immediately. Yeah. One of the things that we do notice is that youths don't want to go to school counselors. Right?
Oh, why?
I mean, for a lot of reasons.
Okay.
For a lot of reasons. I think if I can kind of just think about it, the first one is stigma.
Okay.
I'm walking to the school counselor's room. Right? My friends know that there's something wrong with me. Yeah, that I'm struggling with something, you know, and then when we think about it, right, there are some schools that require the school counselor to walk the student back into class.
So everyone will know.
Yeah.
That yeah, okay.
Everyone knows. Yeah, and what happens if you're not a bad kid? If I'm a bad kid, I can still say I've been naughty, you know. Right? I got a reputation to keep, right? But you know, if I'm not right, I'm just your average student. Even worse, I'm a school leader, right? Then I think a problem, you know. So we're talking about a young person undergoing a stage of identity building, right? Identity versus role confusion, right? Eric Erickson. But you know, we think about not just that, you know, we're looking at school counselors not having the right amount of time for youths, right? Then we talk about school policies whereby confidentiality is not kept, you know, whereby I go to the school counselor and now everyone in my school knows that I have a mental health problem. Yeah, it could have been done in a very, like, you know, in a way whereby the school counselor thought that they were doing the best. Maybe they spoke to the student's form teacher and said like, hey, just want you to know, right? Can you look out for this kid? Then the form teacher don't know how to keep their mouth shut, right? And then everybody knows, right? So that happens quite often. And then, you know, there are some schools that require the school counselor to let a few teachers know or a bunch of teachers know, right? So the confidentiality is an issue. Right. But
to the student, they'll be really horrified,
of
right?
Course.
They just told one person, and in the end, the whole world knew about it.
So in you know, we do what we call youth conversations with students, with youth, right? And what we find is that one of the very common thing, I mean, go to our TikTok, you know, and you know, our TikTok channel and take a look at the comments, right? A lot of times people will say that school counselors are snitches. Right. So the other thing is that the other thing that we notice as well is that school counselors are very overworked. So they may be the most empathetic, or maybe they may start as the most empathetic people in the world, right? But you know, there's only so much you can do, you know. You can have empathy fatigue, you know, and after a while, you may not be as effective as a counselor anymore if you have like hundreds of cases to deal with. So, you know, that becomes another problem. I don't believe that there are counselors that go into the, okay, I hope, right? there are no counselors that go into the profession, you know, without loving the people that they serve, right? But, you know, you can get jaded. Yeah, you can get jaded, and that's the reality of like the work that we do. And on top of that, right, we're talking about a school counselor seeing hundreds of kids at any point in time. I'm not just seeing the kids with mental health issues, you know. I've seen the kids that are being abused at home. I've seen the kids that have lost family. I've seen the kids that were dealing with grief. I've seen the kids that are problematic in school. I'm seeing kids that have ADHD. I've never been trained for this, right? It was one module in school, half a module, one part of a module, right? And you know, I'm asked to deal with all that, and then on top of that, you know, I need to build good rapport, and it's tough. It's tough. And when we think about it, you know, I think really we've seen that even in reach, we notice that the burnout is real. Yeah. And that's when we talk about like one bad experience is more enough. All it takes is one person in the classroom, right, to have a bad experience. Everybody in the classroom is never going to go to a school counselor again. Yeah. And when we did a poll in 2018, with 120 random youths that we found in Serangoon, right? we just walked around with balloons and frisbees and like,
Fantastic.
yeah, hey, come take a, like, have fun, right? Have a great day, right? Go and play, right? And help me do this survey, right? So we did that, and we got 120 youths to come and like just tell us a little bit more about their help-seeking kind of behaviors. School counselors were the last choice.
What's the first? Their
first choice. First would be go online. Go online and search. Second choice would be go to friends.
Okay.
Right. And third choice, surprisingly, right, the third highest choice was go to external professional.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And then after that, it's to seek help from an adult that cares about you. Yeah. So
But it cares about you some more, okay?
Right? Adult in your life lah. So teachers, parents, right? Those are adults in your life, right? Church leader, these are adults, right? So we talk about like go, that's about then.
But going online can be quite problematic, right?
It can be good, it can be bad lah. So
okay.
With those results, actually, what we did was that we took, being a very young organization, with whatever little finances we had, we spent money on SEO.
NCO?
Yeah, SEO, like search engine optimization.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's when we realized that that's if you go on to Google and you type for talk to someone, we will turn out on the first page.
Very nice.
Yeah. And that has been what sets us apart. Because youths come to us through Google, right?
And because that's their first avenue, right? That's what they'll do, they'll Google first, right? So they will look for you first.
And I guess,
wow, okay.
It's a good thing. It's not, maybe it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, but we've always done a lot of work online. Like this year we partnered with TikTok to do a lot of stuff, together with them and on our own channels as well. When we posted our first video about why youths don't seek help.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, we're here for you, right? 150 youths came in that weekend.
Wow, okay. So it's a really effective engagement tool.
I think it's not just about it being effective engagement tool, but it also points to how many youths out there don't know that they can seek help and feel that it's not safe to seek help.
Okay.
And when finally something safe appears, right, they pounce on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But going back to online, right? So just now we also briefly mentioned, actually, because they are exposed to social media at a very, very young age. There's Facebook, maybe they're not on Facebook, they're on Instagram and TikTok. There's also quite a lot of exposure to body image issues, eating issues, peer pressure, and even cyberbullying, right? So how would you actually advise all these kids that they are, exposed to so many of these pressures from online sources?
I come from maybe a relatively old school way of thinking of it, which is I don't necessarily think that social media and all of these pressures that they feel via social media is anything new. I think youth have always felt the same social comparison issues. I mean, the same debate during our time, which, dated
maybe
as far back as you want to. It was about I know, right? It was magazines, correct, right? It was magazines. It was about all these, Her World and, I don't know, Vogue or whatever, showing extremely skinny, skinny people. I mean, it's only now that, you can go onto, like, say, a closed website in the US where you have, plus size models, right? So this is only something that's very new anyway, right? So sometimes I hesitate to say, these body image issues have suddenly exploded because of social media. I think these ideals about body image, what the ideal body image is, has been around forever. I think so I'm very careful when I think of they're exposed to all these bad ideas, right? I think these bad ideas have been around in different forms over time, and these debates and the same people who are at risk are probably still at risk. So the ones who are socially compared, who don't have friends, right? Who don't have good family relations, and therefore very don't feel supported, or and so on. Sometimes I think social media just gets a bad rap. I think that social media can have a really good role to play. Like Asher says, most kids go on social media. It's really about teaching. It all goes back to digital literacy skills, right? Which we're all talking about now, is being able to really, how do you engage with the fact that you're going to see a skinny person online? How are you going to engage with the fact that there are going to be trolls online who are going to say mean things to you, right? It's teaching people resiliency skills against these things, rather than saying that these things are bad, full stop. They're evil and we don't know what to do about it. There are a lot of mechanisms that can come into play early on that are helpful.
I think it boils back down to education, not just from teachers, but from parents as well, right? To help young people realize that what they see online is not always real.
I think so, I think a lot of young kids, they really take things quite literally. Yeah.
I mean, look at what I'm moving back to what Jacqueline said, right? I completely agree.
But those are very mainstream and very far away, right? I mean, for social media, you see influencers and all that, and you feel more intimate. And sometimes, because you see them like every day on your Instagram, sometimes you feel like they're your friend. So I think the impact is a bit different.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, right, it can be something that cuts for good, whereby a lot of great movements have come off of like people organizing something online, right? Body positivity. We're talking about like many great movements, like even this boon in mental health, like education and psychoeducation. It came out from. If we didn't have social media, we would have it. But we talk about like not just that, but I think the other challenge though is like exactly what you mentioned, right? That I know that this like I know that this model or this actress or this actor, right? Is on screen because they are handsome. They are paid to be handsome, right? They are paid to be pretty, right? So I don't have 7 hours a day to spend at gym, what? Right? I don't have like washboard abs because I don't have 7 hours a day to spend at gym. If I was paid to do that, I would have, right? But when we think about it, one of the challenges is that when I, as a young person, go online and I see this influencer, I start to think that, hey, that could be me. And I could do that. Or like, I could follow that. But the other thing is this, I think people all realize that people like to see pretty things
Definitely.
online.
Yeah, it's true.
People follow pretty things online. I think we all do, right? So we don't follow like ugly people. I think that's just a natural human behavior, right? So
in
what
real life too, Asher.
in real life too, right? In real life too. So what happens when my my self-esteem, right, is tied to the number of followers I have.
Yeah, the number of likes.
It's tied to the number of people. Yeah. And we've kind of exchanged the number of real life friends. Now, we used to have those popular kids in school, tons of friends, right? And that's all we know, right? That's all we know. Like, that's my environment, like the school, the playground, the church, the community, wherever, right? If I'm popular there, I'm popular there. But now we have an additional place, right, whereby the people who are following me are not just my friends, not just people I know in real life, right? And it plays into this like identity issue, like this identity thing. Like, I'm building my identity as a teenager, right? And as a teenager, I would like people to follow me. I would like it, if I happen to be one of those people, right? We think about Singapore Idol a long time ago, right? That was the closest thing that we have to today, right? Why is it the queues were so long? Why is it so many people who cannot sing, right? Go try out for it.
So terrible. People cannot sing.
It's true, right? That's my favorite part. I love watching the front part. All the people cannot sing. But when we think about it, right? Why is it they all chase fame? Why? Because there's an innate part of us that wants to be accepted.
Okay. And social media is quantifying the number of likes they have. it's actually, they have a number to their popularity, right?
Yeah. So I want to be part of the pretty people, the handsome people, right? The people follow, right? So that also, we are also seeing this in the change in fashion, the way you dress up and all that. I mean, before the pandemic lah, right? Now after pandemic, nobody seems to care anymore. But before that, right? Like I work in town, right? So I get to see how the youth used to dress up, right, before the pandemic. I would come to town in shorts and slippers when I was a student, right? I'll come in my school uniform, right? But a lot of times I also noticed that a lot of the youths come to town, like the guys come in like blazers and like, dude, that's not hot, right? So when we look at this, I think the thing about youth is that they will always chase the new shiny thing. Right. So when we think about it, like, if they are always going to chase the next most interesting shiny thing, right, then, we have to be a little bit more aware, right, that if we don't tell them that this thing that they're idolizing, right, is not real, then they may not actually realize that it's unattainable. Yeah, for some of them.
Actually, you're just making me think, right? So on the one hand, we're talking about, telling the kids that, is this, thing attainable versus unattainable? Is it realistic? Is this giving you, is it a snapshot of someone's moment of life when they're actually happy? I mean, who wants to see a sad face, right? Or an ugly face and so on, right? But the other thing that struck me was this, right? Is it an issue of values, right? A change in values of what's important to kids nowadays. So, for example, is popularity more important to kids nowadays? Is fame more important to kids nowadays? Is that really what is the underlying driver, right, of wanting the likes of, or is it monetization, right? Is it that the kids are seeing this as a way to make money? So the more likes you get, they think, I don't have to study so hard because I can be an influencer and make money without having to go to school, right? So isn't it really an issue of those kinds of things that are coming into play rather than simply just telling them is real versus not real? Are there a larger, ways of living that, the society is now that we have to think about that are creating these issues?
Yeah, I guess social media has just kind of amplified everything that we know has been troubling youth and has been challenging for youth. Yeah. I guess also, when we look at it from the perspective of like pressure, social media does bring across quite a bit more pressure for young people, because all my insecurities are amplified. All my hopes that I could do this, I could do that are amplified. Yeah. And now I have a platform. So last time I didn't need to look pretty because I got no chance to be actor, right? But now I got chance to be influencer, right? So that's those youths who feel that they need that they need that in their lives, right? They will try. What happens if they fail? That will affect them. Yeah. So I guess really on one hand that is a challenge that we are seeing for social media with regards to social media. But again, like I said, social media is also a very good thing. It allows movements to happen, allows education to happen, right? But of course, when we talk about knowledge of course can be stressful to have. Yeah. I mean, the whole debate about going online and talking about weaves, what kind of like hairstyle do I have and all that, is this insulting, is this like racial, like, appropriation and all that, cultural appropriation. These are things that they are going to bring back to their own cultures as well. Yeah, it's not just about how I look, but it's about everything that is normalized online are things that I would want to normalize in my own environment. Yeah. So if I'm Chinese, then I go online, I see like, wow, you know what, I'm not supposed to braid my hair because cultural appropriation. I might be tempted to go and say to someone else, hey, cannot wear qipao, Right? So these are conversations that I've seen online, right? And youths, I think, like it or not, they are easily influenced.
That's about being young, right?
Yeah, that's
the whole
about
point.
being...
We need to be at that age to be easily influenced, so that we can make up our minds about various things. It's just that everybody wants us to, focus on one thing and have an identity that is risk-free and follows a certain path. I think that's a big challenge often.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to shift the conversation a little bit more to youths who are LGBTQ actually, because we do see that some studies and from some reports they say that they are actually more susceptible to mental health issues. So to both Jacqueline and Asher, what more can be done to help this subgroup of people who are facing issues?
Asher, you want to go first?
Can. I guess really it's about acceptance. I know that there are going to be people who don't agree with their lifestyle.
Oh, it can't be really called lifestyle also, right? It's more of their sexual orientation.
Yeah, their sexual orientation. I know there are going to be people who don't agree, who disagree, based off cultural values, religious values, and all that. But I think the reality is that there are still people, human beings, that need love, right? They need to be seen as human. They need to have human rights as well, right? So when we look at a young person who we've been talking so much about how this is such a challenging point in life for young people. Being young, right? Adolescence is challenging. Right, I'm finding out about myself. I'm figuring out about myself. I'm learning about myself, and parts of my body are changing. Parts of my mind are changing. Right, I'm starting to worry about things that I've never worried about before. And when at this point in time I'm being told by the people around me that what I believe or what I'm starting to feel, right, is wrong. Then it becomes tough. Right, that's when I start to feel like I'm not being accepted, I'm not being loved, I'm not being cared for, right? And what about my future? What happens if my family kicks me out of home? What happens if all these people that I built my entire community, my life around, don't accept me anymore because of my sexual orientation? Yeah. When we look at it from that perspective, it's tough. It's tough. And we are looking at, overseas. We don't have research in Singapore. We don't have the research in Singapore, but we know, right, that youths or people from the LGBTQ community in other countries have a higher chance of being homeless. Have a higher chance of, they're going to get kicked out of their house, right? Have a higher chance of being, of being attacked. Have a higher chance of being sexually assaulted. Have a higher chance of being of having a mental health issue. And when I look at all these other things that they are experiencing, I wonder, is it any wonder why they have mental health issues? Right? Because everything that can go wrong for them goes wrong for them, right? We talk about the whole world being against you. Literally the whole world is against you, Yeah. So even in spaces that are supposedly safe, like my school, like my church, like my home, right? What happens when I lose access to these places because of something that is inherently quite a big part of me? Yeah, then when that happens, then it's challenging lah. It becomes very challenging. Yeah, and what next? Like when we talk about in Singapore, can I buy a flat? Cannot what? Cannot get married what? Don't have any way. I get married also, I don't think I can buy a flat with my partner until we're 35 then who I live with, right? So this practical stuff also is hard to think about, right? So pressure is pressure. Yeah, and I don't doubt that many of these pressures, have an effect on their mental health state. Yeah, on the state of their mental health actually. Yeah.
I think from my viewpoint, when we're talking about, so how can we meet some of their needs, right? We don't have the research in Singapore, which I think, would be very helpful. But, based on external research, we show that they are at greater risk, right, for mental health issues for these various systemic reasons, right? Of stigma, of discrimination, etc. I think I take a very pragmatic view of how we can help them. And I think a large part goes back to the training of the mental health professionals, because assuming that, many of these, and again, you have to realize that not everybody has mental health issues just because they're LGBTQ, right? Or they identify in that manner. I mean, there is a higher, there's maybe a higher proportion of them, but not all of them, certainly. But for those who do end up in mental health services, I mean, I recently finished a study in the US looking at transgender youth that 18 to 25 years old, and I looked at barriers to treatment, right? And you would say that's probably in the US more than even Singapore or Asia in general, that there's a certain, a little bit more acceptance, or at least, an openness about talking about these issues, right? And even there you have kids talking about how, they've gone to providers who simply don't know enough about LGBTQ issues, and as a result, they don't receive the non-judgmental treatment. They receive the wrong types of treatment. The wrong types of issues are being discussed in session. They have very bad experiences with these mental health professionals because these professionals are not so-called, quote-unquote, culturally competent, right? They're not trained to understand how to work with these issues. And I think so, while, yes, there's a larger issue of the system or the society as being a big contributor to these problems, I think a pragmatic first step is really to begin to train our mental health professionals across Singapore on evidence-based, culturally competent methods, right? So what do we know from the research about what youth who, identify in this manner? And this is across the board, not just for LGBTQ youth, but just in general for any kind of youth mental health. But let's say for LGBTQ youth, what are the issues that they face, right? How do we address them? You don't want to be the therapist who keeps asking the person your client to be the one who's explaining their life, why they're doing certain things in their life, right? Why they feel certain ways. As a therapist, you should come with that knowledge already on how to deal with these issues and what the best way to deal with your parents not accepting you might be, right? How to deal with parents who are being, challenging about these issues. And I think a lot of people are not trained in that. And I think pragmatic first step, if you really want to help these youth, are to ensure that the providers that they see are trained in these issues. And I think you're increasingly seeing that's the case in a lot of the youth mental health outfits, but it's not across the board. And I think you still need it across the board because not all youth go to these more youth-oriented mental health services in Singapore.
I think to add on to that, another thing that I would love for, to think about is giving for organizations that deal with mental health to think about having a wider variety of professionals that they bring on board. The truth of the matter is that many mental health professionals, many helping professionals are also very religious people. Yeah. And not many of them, there's going to be cognitive dissonance, right? When it comes to is it my values, versus my profession, right? My values and my beliefs versus my profession. And truth be told, right, not every mental health professional, no matter how well trained, right, will be able to bring themselves to treat a person, from the LGBTQ community with no judgment. Yeah. Because fundamentally to them it still feels wrong. If that's the case, I think one of the things that would be a good practice, personally, it's just my personal opinion, is to have people who are more open about this, as part of members of your staff, right? I have members of staff who openly tell me that they know nothing about LGBTQ, so they don't dare to take on cases, and they themselves are religious, so they are very afraid, right, that they might accidentally judge, right? But on staff, we also have people who are very much, very supportive, and we also have a member of the LGBTQ community, right? So these are the ones, right, who take on those cases. Yeah, and I guess really we can't change what people believe. You can't lah. Yeah, we can change.
It's just hard lah, long lah.
Long lah. I think it's just easier to hire a varied myriad of like practitioners.
That is true. No, I agree. I agree. I think there's definitely a need for a diversity of counselors and providers. But I think that's interesting that you talked about, who in Singapore are the ones who are engaged in a lot of these. So who are the providers, right? And what are their backgrounds? We kind of think that, part of treatment, we're taught to be non-judgmental, to be aware of our judgments. This is across the board, whether it's about identity issues or values, because it could be anything, right? From a youth being engaging in certain practices, premarital sex, for example, right? We don't really talk about sexual orientation necessarily. It could be about whether a youth wants to get married or not, right? There are so many different aspects about life that can be judged. So I just think it's interesting. I think these are issues, but this notion of non-judgment goes across the board for all communities or youth communities, and not necessarily just LGBTQ.
You know why I talk about this? Because I came from the flip side, right? Because I'm really religious, you guys. And I did my master's in divinity, guys. So
actually, I did not know that. Maybe I don't want to friend you anymore. Just kidding.
One thing that happened during my bachelor's degree, right, when I was doing my social work degree, was that I had this conversation about like 377C, right? And 377C.
Oh, okay.
Last time was C, I think now it's A. but back then was when they were like, hey, abolish it, right? So then there were two schools of thought, right? So it really, we can see like my class split in two, right? And I happened to just, as part of the conversation in class, say like, hey, doesn't this affect family values? And one of my classmates said, how? Right? How does this affect family values? Right? Then I look at her, I was like, I didn't have an answer. And what I did next, right, was that I took my next assignment and I did that assignment on the LGBTQ community. Right, so I went to Ugachaga, I had a talk to, with Brian, the director there, and all that, and just had conversations. I educated myself, and that's why I think I can work with the community today, right? Because I can see them, from a perspective of like, you struggle, and you're just another human being that I want to help. Yeah, but of course the reality is that not every single practitioner is going to be able to do that. Yeah.
It's a work in progress for all of us for various issues. Let's not just say with this issue, but there are various trigger points all of us have, right, about certain things that we believe in, and certain things that are important to us. That life, people have so many different experiences that we cannot expect to understand and empathize with everyone so easily. But we try, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's still quite a lot of work to be done to further improve, enhance our mental health caregiving and approach and all that. I think we're coming to the end. So you guys have any last words to say, or like anything that you want to say in conclusion?
I feel that we talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Asha, do you have any last words of wisdom? I will launch into something if not.
Maybe I guess we've really spoken about a lot of things, but if I was to really talk about like what sums up mental health, the mental health facing youth, mental health issues facing youth in Singapore would be that it's complex. We can't boil it down to one issue or two issues, right? It's a very, very complex systemic issue, right? That will take time to change. In fact, it may never change, right? But I think really we want to ensure that, we should ensure that services are available. If we're seeing this as a problem, we should ensure that services are available and that education is available. Yeah, for not just youth, but the people who are in the lives of youth as well.
Jacqueline?
I'm going to tag on to that, with regards to services and education. I think I agree completely. I think that's where the direction should be. But I think I'll kick it up a notch by one and say, I think where we need to be going is looking at it from an evidence-based perspective, so a research perspective, right? We don't want to just proliferate a whole bunch of services which have no necessary impact, right? That we can see. And I think, so the next step really is a few things. One of them is to ensure that, we have people who are practicing in an evidence-based way. So, there's certain kinds of treatments that we know work well and work quickly. And there are other types that are less so for different kinds of disorders, right? So I think that's one. So being able to ensure that practitioners are practicing in the right manner, that's evidence-based and that has actual impact on youth. Because if you have families who are, going through what they call counselling, right? And they don't see any effects of that, that's also going to give mental health services a bad rep, right? Because they think, well, it doesn't work, why waste my time, right? So I think we know there's evidence-based treatments that can be used that work, and you can see it change within 8 to 12 weeks, right? And so 3 months, you should be able to see some kind of change. In fact, there's some people say even 1 or 2 sessions you should be able to see some kind of change, but you have to do it in the right way. So one of them, it starts with, okay, what are the evidence-based strategies and practices, and are the providers in Singapore following that? Number one. 2, are they trained to do that, right? So then it goes back to training. Are we training our professionals in a way that allow them to have these strategies that work? And then the third level would then be, okay, so if they're trained, are we going to regulate them, right? To make sure that everyone is trained in the right way, are we going to regulate mental health services in Singapore, regulate mental health providers in Singapore, which, by the way, we do not. Okay, and this is a big bugbear of mine, because what you're then having is a variety of people who all say they're counselors, they all say they're therapists and all of that. But there's a variation again in people's aptitudes, right, or capabilities, abilities to provide services that actually work. And as a result of that, they have a lot of people coming back saying, well, that didn't work, or they don't, or the other way that you see is, oh, it's so expensive and nothing happened. Right? And so mental health services are expensive. They take people's time, they take people's training. But I think people have to see the value of it as well, right? And if they see that doesn't work, or I just go there and talk and then nothing happened, then yeah, so you can kind of see from so you need evidence-based practice, you need regulation, you need training. And I think those are the issues that really can take us forward into getting our youth the help that they need. And it cuts across, right? All these things about saying, there are various issues that come into play. What are the pragmatic things that we can do? And this is it. To me, this is where the next step really is.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah, thanks, everyone. I would like to thank Asher also for your time today. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. Please follow or subscribe to the On Diversity podcast to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website ipscommons.sg for more info.